the evolution of surgical hair restoration it's an amazing thing to kind of watch from the inside, to understand the industry, to know what really transpires behind the scenes, and to see how consumers kind of react to the trends and how the trends are kind of really set and put out there, and how the information is controlled online, and just the kind of like the inside baseball of the industry. Back in 1998, and guys, I'm sorry I'm keeping you guys on hold for a long time. I have two great guests who are on hold, and we have a full board of calls, so I will get to the phone in a second. But back in, when I started my career, follicular unit transplantation was basically just kind of a concept. There were a few doctors who embraced this concept. Bobby Limmer from San Antonio, Texas, was a guy that, and I don't want to say discovered, but basically realized that hairs grew in naturally occurring follicular units and naturally occurring groupings. And what hair transplant surgeons were doing before, they were cutting these groupings up into unnatural bundles. They were either creating much larger grafts with more hairs, or they were splitting up these naturally occurring units. And it was his concept, and he thought, when he looked at the hair-bearing tissue under a microscope, he thought to himself, why don't we just kind of dissect this tissue into its naturally occurring units and then implant those units? And it was brilliant. I mean, basically, that's as close to mimicking nature as you can get. The thing is, no one really listened to him initially. And he wasn't the type of guy to really push his agenda, which is unfortunate because he really should have. A lot more people have been helped a lot earlier on. So when I was writing my first chapter, writing the first book and writing my chapter on surgical hair restoration, I was going to lambaste the industry because everything that I saw was complete crap. Trying to make a long story short, I met Dr. Bob Bernstein. He introduced me to follicular unit transplantation. I learned about the history, and I learned that at the time there were only 11 doctors doing it. So I wrote The Bald Truth, and I really took a stand and said, if your physician is not performing follicular unit transplantation with the use of microscopic dissection and with this type of a team, then you're going to the wrong doctor. I chose to separate those 11 doctors from the rest of the entire industry. And that kind of set up there was a big shitstorm once my book was published. But within a year and a half of the publication of The Bald Truth, once it became a bestseller, which was very quickly, and once I got on the radio, the industry made a tremendous shift. Within 2 years, a large percentage of the more ethical guys converted their practices, spent the money to change the infrastructure of their practices, to accommodate a bigger staff, and to perform follicular unit transplantation. And honestly, I believe it's because we created a significant amount of economic pressure. We basically made everything else look less than. And the fact of the matter, it was. So there's a tremendous shift in the industry. Fast forward, to a couple of years, then FUE kind of came into play. We pushed FUE. I'm not going to go over that story again. As more people embraced follicular unit extraction, there were companies that decided to work diligently to try to automate the process, to make it easier for doctors to perform this procedure. Now, the consumer definitely wants a less invasive procedure. I would say that if you asked, 10 hair transplant patients if they would be happier with a quasi-scarless procedure, meaning there's no linear scar in the back of their head, would they go for that? If they were able to get a similar yield or the same yield, they're going to say yes. Who wants a scar on their back of their heads? Now it's 2014, and there are a couple of players in the market who are really promoting their hair transplant devices. There are some guys who have embraced using these devices. And I got to say that for the most part, at least in our industry, the good guys, the guys who really understand surgical hair restoration, there seems to be a lot of good results coming from the use of these devices. Now, the question that I get from every doctor who wants to get into this field now is not how do I learn to do strip, but what should I do? Should I do the Artas hair transplant or should I do the NeoGraft hair transplant? These guys, especially these new guys, think that these are basically procedures when in fact the Artas is a robot that extracts follicular unit grafts, and the NeoGraft is a handheld device that's connected to a machine that is kind of a motorized handheld device that extracts grafts as well. Well, as you know, we have a lot of members in the IHRS, and everyone kind of does, while they're all great doctors, everyone kind of does their own thing. That's really what the practice of medicine is. One physician may think that one device works better than the other. One physician may think that no devices work well and they'd rather do it by hand. But I have two guys that I wanted to bring on today who are both known as follicular unit extraction experts. We have Dr. Alan Bauman and Dr. Bill Yates. As you know, Dr. Bauman was probably one of the first 5 or 6 guys to really embrace FUE back in the day when I was really trying to get people to kind of listen to the idea that this was a viable option for patients. And he was all ears. And Dr. Bill Yates is a guy who's been in the industry for a while, for quite a while now, who is also a hair transplant patient. He's had several strip procedures, and he can correct me if I'm wrong about that when I pot him up. And he's also had a couple of FUE procedures. He decided to convert his entire practice to FUE. And he decided to do that with the aid of the Artas robotic hair transplant system, while Dr. Bauman is a fan of the NeoGraft. I'm going to pot these guys up, and the reason I wanted to bring them on is, the big question is, what's better, the Artas or the NeoGraft? New guys who are getting into the industry want to know what they should purchase. My first response is always, listen, guys, you got to learn about hair transplants before you do this. But these are both experts who both have their opinions and who have utilized these devices successfully in their practices. And I wanted to talk to them about their experience and why they chose one device over the other. And first of all, I want to welcome both of you guys to the broadcast. And listen, I know you both have your own take on things. And I want to start with, if you don't mind, Dr. Yates, I'm going to start with Dr. Bauman because he has been doing follicular unit extraction for, I think it's about a decade now. Right, Doc?
Well, yeah, we started back in the early 2000s. But first, let me say just congratulations on all the success so far with GFQ and the Bald Truth. It's really just it's awesome to see the amount of viewers and so forth. And I just want to say congratulations. The show has really blossomed, and it's amazing to see what the technology can do.
Well, I really appreciate that. And listen, you've been there from the beginning. You've been a friend of the Bald Truth since probably maybe the second year I was on radio.
Yeah, I must have missed the book by maybe a week or so, probably, right?
That's right.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's true.
But also, yeah, I want to say hi to Dr. Bill Yates, a good friend, an awesome surgeon, and I'm honored to be on with him discussing the latest and greatest hair transplant surgery. So, hey, Bill, how you doing, man?
Good. Same to you.
Now, let me ask you: can you guys hear each other well?
Yeah, pretty good.
I heard
How's
what
my
he
audio?
said. Yes.
Okay. All right, so I'll raise everyone's audio just so that you could hear all of us. All right, so you know what? I'm going to start with Dr. Bauman, and Doc, we've had our own debates over things over the years. You know how I feel about low-level laser light therapy. I'm starting to kind of, I'm starting to loosen up with that. I'm starting to see some significant anecdotal evidence. A lot of guys are starting to come to me saying now that they're getting good results. But I tell it like it is. If I don't see something,
and you're having good luck with the laser cap, right?
Yeah. Well, not yet. You haven't sent me one.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll work on that.
Yeah. If you can, actually get me one of those laser hoods, and I'll put it in the living room and just watch TV with it.
Okay, that's a good idea. Actually, you could do it while you're doing your show. That would take care of at least 30 minutes.
That would be very funny, actually. Maybe I'll do that. But so listen, you've been, you started doing follicular unit extraction by hand. You kind of had to learn on your own because, sadly back in the day, everything was trial and error. People were not kind of sharing their information. The first people to share their information, obviously, was Bill Rasmussen and Bob Bernstein, who wrote the first paper on follicular unit extraction. And I think that gave way to more guys kind of, trying out the technique to see if they were able to produce good results in their practice. So why don't we talk about a little bit of the evolution of how you got into it?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think right around the time we were all thinking about FUE, as Dr. Woods was promoting some interesting results and people were traveling to Australia to have this minimally invasive procedure that was very secretive, right? And I remember having the discussion with you, actually, because my background in general surgery kind of led me towards minimally invasive surgery to begin with.
Right.
And I think it was late 1999 or 2000, 2001, somewhere around that time, 2000. We were talking a lot about it.
Are you kidding me? I was calling anybody who would listen, and I'm like, listen, you guys have to take a look at this. You have to figure this out. And everyone said I was crazy. You were one of the few guys who said, you know what, this seems interesting.
No, definitely you were pushing in the right direction, and I was all for it. I mean, I love the idea of minimally invasive surgery. I remember, taking gallbladders out through an 8-inch incision and taking gallbladders out through the belly button, and there was no question that patients did better with minimally invasive surgery, so I was all for it. But there was no way to figure out how to get it done except to really put small needles and punches to tissue and to try to get these hairs out of the scalp. And it was not simple. It was not easy. There were no custom instruments at that time. And it was trial and error. And,
isn't it unfortunate that, and again, I have a lot of respect for Ray Woods. I think that he really he's a caring physician. He really cared for his patients, at least, his own patients. But he would not share this information. He would not help you guys out. He wouldn't, he wouldn't even give you a hint. Basically, he almost I actually, in some cases, I think he did blindfold patients when they came into the OR, so that they wouldn't be able to write about his, whatever tools he was using. I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think I remember that correctly.
I don't know any of his patients, and I don't know Dr. Woods personally, but the amount of time and effort and energy and expense that we take lecturing to doctors about FUE and about hair transplantation, from the artistry to the technology to hair loss management. And so if you're talking about a physician who is keeping things to himself and trying to block his patients from even seeing what the technology is, I have to just say, Spencer, I have very, very little respect for that whatsoever. And,
well, I
long history.
I could appreciate that. Now, let me ask you, I think one of you guys may have your computers up. I don't know if that's you, Dr. B.
No, I don't. My computer's on mute, but I am using headphones. So
okay, it's possible. There's a little bit of feedback, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Okay. Yeah, I have headphones in, so you shouldn't be hearing any of that.
Okay. All right. So go ahead.
So, we spend literally tens of thousands of dollars per year to travel and to teach. So, anyway, that's water under the bridge. So I designed some of the first few instruments. The Mindex, the FUE Mindex, the Bauman Mindex, was the first available instrument specifically designed to help surgeons extract follicles using an FUE approach. And we put it out there. It was the first instrument available to the general public. It was dispensed and distributed by George Eamon. And it wasn't an easy instrument to use, but it was our first attempt.
Yeah. But you shared that with the rest of your colleagues, and
we demonstrated.
You demonstrated, yeah. Right?
I was the first surgeon to perform a live FUE surgery at the Orlando Live Surgery Workshop.
Right.
It escapes me exactly what year that was. I think it was 2003. But anyway, the point is, Spencer, that we've been working at this for a long time, and I have to say that just last year we passed the 1 million graft mark for FUE extracted grafts at Bauman Medical Group.
That's pretty amazing.
So thanks, and we've moved a lot of hair around using that technique. And to make a long story short, here's the story. So other devices came available. I got wind of the NeoGraft, which was made in France, and I acquired one of those devices in 2006. And it was an automated FUE device, and I would be the first to tell you that it was a big old clunker, and it wasn't great. And we had other devices that were manually extracting grafts that worked better than that first automated device. And when the same company promoted the NeoGraft at a conference in Montreal, I was very skeptical until I held the device in my hand. And then really I got an inkling that this would be better working than what we had with the NeoGraft potentially, and I was able to strike a deal to take it for a test drive. And in late 2006, I think we were extracting some grafts with the NeoGraft. And again, nobody taught us how to do it. We had to figure it out on our own. There was no videos. There was nothing to watch.
Now that's what's interesting to me is that this company's manufacturing this device. And you would think, at the very least, that somehow there would be some sort of demonstration, some sort of testing before the device is actually completely manufactured, just to show people how to utilize it and how to extract those grafts.
Well, okay, so here's how it works, right? So they show you a video of the device in action. We try to duplicate that video, and it didn't work. I mean, it didn't work the way that they said it would. So we had to figure out a different way because it literally didn't do what it said it was going to do, and that was a big problem.
Okay,
so we had to work and figure out the methods to be able to use a minimal depth, literally a depth limiter, to be able to cut and score around the follicle to be able to harvest the hair, hairs.
Okay, so you guys, so you figured it out. You decided, you know what, I'm going to start using the NeoGraft. I'm going to promote the NeoGraft in my practice. I think that this is the way to go because at least in your hands and in the hands of you yourself and your technicians, you believe that you were getting robust grafts, and once you started to see the growth, you thought that this was the best possible technology, correct?
Well, yeah. First, we had to get the grafts, and then second, we had to get the growth. And then once things were working, then it became more of a procedure than just for an eyebrow. Because what we had done up until 2007, we're harvesting enough grafts just for an eyebrow transplant.
Right.
And that's not going to work for the scalp. It's just, a couple of hundred grafts, that were single hairs or two hairs is not going to do the job. So we knew that there had to be something better. And when we were able to see the numbers of hairs per graft come up and the numbers of hairs per day, remember grafts per day, I should say, then it became a viable technology. And I'll tell you, it was, in the early days, FUE was only 10% of my practice before, 2005, 2006. And it rapidly changed. Once we hit about 1,500 grafts per day, then all of a sudden it was really, that's when things kind of broke open. And that was 2007.
All right. So now, so we got your history, kind of see why you decided to go in this direction. I want to speak to Dr. Yates to kind of get a little bit about his history out there and why he chose to go in the direction that he chose. And then I would love for you guys to kind of discuss, your thoughts on each device and, again, why you choose, Dr. Bauman, the NeoGraft over the Artas, and why Dr. Yates chooses the Artas over the NeoGraft. So Bill, give us a little bit of history. Obviously, I know the history, but I think it's important for people to understand how you've become an FUE expert. You're relatively new on the scene as far as, the online scene, but you've been around for a while.
Okay, well, I guess if 2005 is a while, I started doing hair transplantation in 2005, and like my good friend Alan, I was a general surgeon and purely laparoscopic surgeon before I started doing hair. So I saw the transition from, big, old, ugly surgery to micro, vascular, less invasive surgery. So when I got wind of FUE, it just made sense to me that this is the way that the natural evolution of medicine is going to go. So I embraced it. So I have to say, my hair started thinning when I was in medical school, maybe in my early 20s. And it really bugged the heck out of me. Everybody has to, keep a game face and tell everybody, oh, it doesn't matter, I still look good, so forth and so on. But it really bugged me. I had my first hair transplant, maybe I was in my late 30s. It was a strip method, and actually I think Dr. Ziering did it, and the results were phenomenal. I couldn't have been happier with having hair up there. So I was, a true believer of a hair transplant. But since that time, when I got into hair transplantation in 2005, I had some FUE procedures after that, and, Dr. Bauman did those for me. I think he did a strip and a FUE, and there's no comparison between the results with, FUE as far.
So how come I didn't know that? I mean, maybe you guys told me that, but I forgot. So Dr. B, you did Dr. Yates's FUE.
Yeah, well, patient confidentiality, Spencer. I'm not going to tell you who my patients are.
Well, but Dr. Yates. I figured maybe Dr. Yates told me. I forgot. I had no idea. Maybe you should have told me.
Yeah. No, I think I did.
So,
no secrets. Other people have been. Dr. Cole has done some beard hair on my head as well.
Right.
And the other thing, because I know so much, when I was growing up, I used to wear one of those systems, hair pieces as well. So there is nothing that anybody can tell me about hair and feeling and what it should look like, and, from every aspect that I don't know.
And that's an interesting perspective that you have, because a lot of guys in the industry don't have that perspective. The one thing that, I say all the time, even though I have become an expert in this field and really understand the business of surgical hair restoration, and I certainly understand the technique and really what I believe is state-of-the-art, and we are the clearinghouse from complaints, I still have not been cut. I still have not had surgery. I choose to paint my head because the vast majority of my hair loss is really on the top, and I kind of do a quasi, coif with some hairspray, and that's it. This is how I live my life. But you have come from every angle. You've had a hairpiece, which I didn't know about. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
You have strip and FUE. So I think you really are able to offer patients a great perspective.
Right. And I'd say, when I started my practice, and I started with, the Bosley Medical Group, and their motto is, strip practice. But, from meeting guys like Alan and Dr. Harris, I pretty much switched over even my practice within Bosley, maybe around 2008, 2009, to purely FUE. The instrument of choice when I was there was, the Harris Safe system, which is a blunt punch. So I became really adept at using that punch, good transection rates, good outcomes. And I started that way. And it was, no way that I was even interested in doing any strip hair procedures. And even to this day, my practice is probably, I'm going to say strongly, 98%, FUE surgery with, a very, very small smattering of strip surgery.
Right. Well, I think that everyone agrees that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Bauman, and you correct me too, Dr. Yates, that there is still a place for strip, and it may not be for younger patients. It may not be for for a large majority of the patients, but I think that there are some patients that definitely can benefit from strip. And the one thing that I always say, and I think you guys may disagree with me on this, is that you cannot remove 100% of the sweet spot using FUE. Now, what do you guys think about that statement? I'll let you go first, Dr. Bauman.
Well, it's my opinion, Spencer, that you can get many, many more hairs over time transplanted over the course of your life if you choose FUE. And the reason why I say that is because, of course, my dad has been on the show, and he's had 3 hair transplants from a Norwood 7 completely back to what looks like a full head of hair. He's had almost 7,000 grafts. But I will tell you that it's very, very difficult to harvest more hair at this point because of the amount of linear procedures that he's had. And he still has just a single scar, but it just makes it very, very difficult. Whereas other patients could potentially, what I've seen in my practice, could have 8,000 or even 10,000 grafts harvested over the course of their life if they want to.
Yeah,
using FUE.
But when I say sweet spot, I'm talking about the most DHT resistant hair. And we do know that, once you go outside of that so-called safe zone, you are taking a little bit more of a chance. Now, I'm not saying you guys are going extremely high or extremely to the, far to the side, but there is a possibility that some of that hair that's being moved, especially in large numbers, may not last a lifetime. What do you say about that?
Well, that's always a concern, and I'm sure, Dr. Yates, Bill can chime in on this.
Yeah.
That it's clinical judgment where you're going to go to take that hair, and you have to look very carefully and know exactly where that miniaturization starts and stops, and where the permanent hair begins. So you better have a pretty good microscope. You better have a good densitometer to be able to really, and also having done thousands and thousands of procedures, so that you're in the right space for that patient in order to harvest that hair. But, remember also that the hair on the fringe of the donor area, if that's destined to go, that's going to be the last hair to go. That's the last hair to go when the guy's, in extensive patterns of balding. And so the idea is to stop the progression of the hair loss with medical management. And I'm a big fan of that, as well as transplantation. So don't ignore the medical management is a good take-home message.
Dr. Yates, what do you think?
No, I couldn't agree more with what Alan says. A lot of criticism is, come against FUE surgeons for going outside of the safe areas and so forth and so on. But, a lot's based on clinical judgment and looking at patterns of miniaturization. Of course, the older the patient is, the better information you have about stability of pattern. But it's no question in my mind, to echo what Alan said, that you can, transplant more grafts over time using FUE procedures than any type of linear procedure. There are several guys that have come to me and, that 50, 60 years old that have been considered tapped out by their surgeons, that we've, transplanted, I'd say, another 3,000 grafts easily for going up, higher on the lateral hump or even lower down toward the nape of the neck. And these people are 50 and 60 years old and showed no evidence of any type of, retrograde alopecia or anything like that. And the other thing is, even if you, say, committed a sin in the eyes of some transplant surgeons and went a little lower or a little higher than need be, and, if you inform the patient that this hair might not be permanent and placed it in a less area of, aesthetic importance, I don't think that, you've done your patient any disservice where now, they have hair for 10 or 20 years that, they didn't have hair. I don't think that, you've, created any medical issue that would be considered sinister or wrong. So,
and I agree with that. I think the philosophy is evolving for sure. I was very dogmatic at least for the first 5 years of my career, and as I have seen different doctors practice this specialty in different ways, I really believe there's more than one way to skin a cat. And there are doctors out there who will disagree with me, doctors who are part of our organization who are going to call me tomorrow and say to me, it's unbelievable how you let this, crap go on. And why are you promoting this? And why are you promoting that? I'm not promoting anything. You know what I'm promoting? I'm promoting the best possible outcome for each individual patient. I think everybody, each patient is different. It's not a one-size-fits-all procedure. And the bottom line is, in some hands, in some practices, they can actually do what they claim they can do. While in other practices, for some reason, they're unable to produce the same type of results that other guys are able to produce. And I don't know why that is.
Because there are too many variables with hair practice. Like, say, for instance, if you're taking out somebody's pancreas or gallbladder, like Alan said, it's not as many variables. But with the hair practice, there's so many variables, like how you extract, extraction times, crushing injury, dehydration, how they implant, storage solutions. There's so many variables to control, and nobody's really done any studies to really isolate these things one by one, and it's too hard to do, that I don't think, to be quite honest, in our lifetime, there'll never be an answer where, people can say, my results are better than yours because of this, because there are too many variables.
I tell you, there are guys out there who will go out there and they'll beat their drums and they will say that their results are better because of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes they throw out some very interesting math that the layman can never really fully comprehend. So there's they throw in some medical jargon and some interesting sounding science, and then all of a sudden they are the leaders in the field. That's the problem with this industry, in my view. You know, obviously it's very entrepreneurial. Everyone is jockeying for their own position in the field, as opposed to, in many cases, you know, a lot of guys working together. What I like about you two guys is, even though I think there's similar philosophies, but obviously there's somewhat of a different philosophy, which we're going to get into because you decided to utilize different devices in your practices. I think you're on the same page for the most part, and I think that you are the type of guys who are actually willing to kind of help each other out, as opposed to kind of like, you know, holding on to your trade secrets, not sharing information. I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, I had no idea that Alan did your surgery. I think that's great. Let's get to these devices. Let's get to the differences and why you guys have chosen to kind of go in separate directions when it comes to the FUE devices that you utilize in your practice. I'm going to go to Dr. Yates first to talk about the Artas. And, you know, there's a reason you chose the Artas, Dr. Yates, as opposed to the NeoGraft. NeoGraft is less expensive, significantly less expensive. And there are people out there who are getting good results with the NeoGraft. Let me just, even before you start, I just want to say one thing. Dr. Bauman knows how I feel about the way the NeoGraft has been marketed over the years, and the concerns that I have about that particular device getting into the wrong hands. These per diem techs, traveling techs that are kind of attached to this piece of equipment. And when this piece of equipment is sold to guys who are not in the hair field, from what I understand, they're also kind of sold a ready-made team, in a sense. And they're told that this is a turnkey operation. All you have to do is purchase this device. Hair transplantation is one of the easier cosmetic procedures to perform. And we have a team that we can kind of share with you or connect you with, who will do the entire procedure. That's a problem to me. And, you know, Dr. Bauman, in your hands, the NeoGraft is working, but sadly what's happening, and I'm seeing it a lot, is that a lot of people are being harmed by this device because it's in the wrong hands. And I will say that the same seems to be happening with the Artas. I just wanted to put that out there before we kind of got into the differences. So, Dr. Yates, I mean, what made you choose the Artas?
Well, I guess the first time I really saw the Artas when I was teaching an FUE course in Dr. Harris's office, and this was fairly recently, I think 2011, and I watched a couple cases with Dr. Harris, and I was impressed with the quality of the graft. I was impressed with the speed and just the overall technical advances that I saw coming down the pike with the Artas automation. And again, you know, I was a laparoscopic surgeon in my previous life, so you know, it appealed to me a lot, you know, to use the Artas. So once that I opened my own practice, having the Artas, even though it was fairly expensive, was very important to me for a lot of reasons, mainly because of the quality of the graft. The speed with which the Artas, you know, extracts or actually punches grafts, we're now able to get up to 1,000 grafts in an hour with, you know, pretty, you know, really good grafts. And, you know, the cases we do now in the Artas are averaging about 2,000 grafts. So you're able to actually punch the grafts. You still have to extract them with the Artas, so that might, you know, take 2 hours to punch, maybe another hour, hour and a half to extract.
Right.
Let's say 4 hours, you know, you've punched and you've extracted grafts, so you're making sites and then putting the grafts in. So the day doesn't last from 8 in the morning to 2 in the morning. It's from like 8 in the morning to 4 in the evening, which makes it a very reasonable day. Well, the other thing that really appealed to me about the Artas, that the capability of the whole, they have a studio now where you can actually take a patient, kind of reel in their expectations. You know, some people want to know, well, what am I going to look like with 2,000 grafts? What am I going to look like with 3,000, 1,500, so forth and so on. So you can create a real-time image of what the patient would look like with different densities, different lengths. And depending on, you know, what's decided on, that can be downloaded into the, you know, Artas computer. And there's now going to be a capability with the Artas to do site making in the near future. They're working on that as well, to actually do site making.
Listen, that's great that they're developing a device that is I mean, could be virtually dummy proof. But there's a lot of concerns out there about, one of the main concerns is the size of the punch. Currently, I know that there's a new iteration where they're using a smaller outer sheath, a 0.9 millimeter punch, I guess, to score the skin. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. So obviously there's going to be less surface area as far as scarring is concerned. But initially, there was some, at least from some of the things that I was told and from some of the images that I have seen, there was, I'm not going to say significant scarring, but it was in the same lines as, some of the older FUE techniques, maybe the Woods technique, where, the grafts or the punches were slightly bigger back in the day. I mean, what do you say about that?
Well, I mean, I haven't, since I've been using it, which has been 2012, and I've been using, with, say, manual FUE, punching 0.8, 0.9, so forth and so on, you can literally tell no difference from the back of an Artas patient once, we've done 2,000 grafts from, a patient that we've punched out with a 0.8 or a 0.9. And Dr. Harris with high-resolution photography has also shown that, the Artas now has two punch sizes, one smaller, like a 0.9, the other one is, 1.0. So the punches are not as small as I think, if Alan can correct me, but I think they can go down to a 0.7 millimeter as far as punch sizes with the NeoGraft. So it's not down to a 0.7 millimeter, but down to a 0.9 and a 0.1, which I think, to the naked eye, and I've done, several of these, that once the hair is even shaved, those little holes are almost, you can't see them. So I don't think that punch size right now really is something that's on the table that, people should really take issue with as far as the Artas. I think that the punch size is definitely, within, normals of FUE practices as how the back of somebody's head should look after a fairly robust procedure.
Well, Dr. Bauman, what do you think about that? Hey, Alan, you there? I think we actually...
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, my opinion is a little bit different. I've been through the whole process, seeing the evolution of 1.0 harvesting, with manual punches and the biopsy tools that we had back years ago, and moving to smaller and smaller grafts, smaller and smaller punches. And as Bill mentioned, yes, we can go 0.8 and 0.7. I think there's a significant difference in terms of just the sheer area, and you could do the math, pi r squared, and see that just a small, 0.1 or 0.2 millimeter difference in punch size gives you a 50% change in area. So there's no doubt that there's a difference in the amount of trauma that you're creating with a punch size. Now, if you're growing your hair to 6 inches, of course, that's not going to make too much of a difference. But I will tell you that as you punch with a larger punch, there's significant more trauma, and there is a chance for more alteration, if you will, of the angles of hairs. So what I've found is that with smaller punch sizes, when we have to go back and do additional procedures, perhaps over time, through the same area, there's less distortion of the hair follicles. Not to mention the fact that I think that patients feel the difference if the scalp has been mistreated. And, I've shared with you, and of course there are those in the industry that know the comparison. There are patients that actually, during the same day, who have had robotic extractions and 0.8 millimeter NeoGraft extractions in some of those practices that have both. And I personally don't do that. We only do NeoGraft. But it's very easy to see in those photos, which I've shared with you actually, the difference between the punch sizes in the trauma or the defect that's left behind.
Well, right, but I think the question here, there is definitely a difference, but I think the question here is, what about graft survival and how robust are these grafts, and how is there a difference in in the quality of the grafts? I mean, if you're using a slightly larger punch, I guess the theory is that you're going to get a more robust graft. And when you're using when you're getting a smaller punch, it's possible that you're going to greater possibility of transection. And again, this is just what the experts are telling me. and a greater possibility of actually splitting, in some senses, the follicular units, or just kind of like, cutting them in half. Have you seen that?
Okay, so let's take those one at a time. If you're talking about punch size versus transection rates, first of all, your transection rate is, regardless of punch size, it has everything to do with technique. And so applying tumescence, stabilizing the tissue, using proper lighting, magnification, having someone who's skilled and adept at extraction. I mean, all of this is what's going to determine your extraction quality, meaning numbers of hairs per graft. And so it's easy to count, and not every patient is going to have the exact same quality of grafts because there's so many variables that can make a case very difficult, for example. So to say that the punch size is going to determine your quality of graft in terms of numbers of hairs per graft, I disagree with. If you're having difficulty doing a 0.8, then you should definitely go to a larger punch size because it's a little bit more forgiving, especially if the patient has, let's say, kinky or curly hair.
But how do you know? How do you know for sure that you're not getting less hair per graft? How do you know for absolute? I mean, have there been studies?
Well, what we study, and this is what I started to present back in early as 2009, 2010, is how we tracked our quality at Bauman Medical Group. And one of the things that we started to do is not just look at speed. Oh, we can harvest X number of grafts per hour, but what we looked at was hairs per graft. Because if you're aiming for 2 or 3 hairs each time, and you're only getting 1 or 2 hairs per graft, then wow, you're going to have a big problem. You're going to be transplanting a lot less hair. So there's a lot of different metrics that we use in terms of QA, quality assurance or quality control, to determine how the case is going, and maybe specific to different areas of the scalp and so forth. But without going into detail, the importance is to know if something is going wrong, all right? Because you will need to be able to adjust. For example, since we're going as slow as we want to go, literally 1 graft at a time if we want to, or a group of 5 or 10 or a dozen or 100.
See, but this is the thing.
Grafts, we can determine.
Doc, in your practice, you guys are experts. You've been doing this for a long time, so you and your team really know what you're doing. But as far as as these devices get out into the mainstream cosmetic surgery world, which they are, I mean,
sure.
And it's not that I'm making a choice at this point, but to me, it seems like it would make more sense to use something that's a little bit more dummy-proof as far as the end result for the patient, as far as the patient being less damaged, and as far as people coming away with a better end result. I think if the artist is in fact as good as everyone who's using it is claiming it is, as far as it really being able to extract a certain number of grafts at a certain speed with a certain transection rate. I mean, the bottom line is if those grafts are extracted well and they're handled well and they're placed in the recipient area as well, they're going to grow well. And guys are coming in for more hair. And, it's not quite as, at least from my understanding, and Dr. Yates, I want you to chime in on this, not quite as user-dependent as the NeoGraft.
Oh, well, I mean, the artist is automated, so I just want to hold that thought for a second. But, Alan, I agree with most everything you said except one thing, that I think punch size is kind of critical as it relates to transection rate. That, of course, it's just like playing, golf or tennis. The bigger your driver is, the bigger the sweet spot, the better you're going to tee off given all skill levels. So if you have a pro like Dr. Bauman or any Dr. Cole, Harris, or even myself, and give them a 7-millimeter punch, the chances of them transecting, of course, are going to be much less than, anyone else with much less experience who's out there doing it. So, I do think for patient safety, large punches, at least in the beginning, are much better. And the issue what graft is too skinny versus fat still hasn't been settled. I must say that, I've punched out a lot of skinny grafts and they do survive. But again, if we're talking about, for a big, large number of people, I think the smallest, largest graft you can punch, if that makes any sense, is what you should use to kind of get reproducible results. And, that's with the larger punch size. I'd say, a 0.9 or 1.0 millimeter is small enough or large enough to get, good results. And, as my grandmother would say, the proof's in the pudding. And it's how these patients look when they come back. Is this reproducible? And like Alan said, I've gone back on several patients that I've done now in the Artas or even with 1 millimeter punches, and it's not that difficult, to do another procedure. I do agree with you. The more than anything is, dummy proof or forgiving, when a lot of people are trying to do it, especially when we're looking at the endpoint of the patient growing hair, is going to be a better thing.
Well, and this is what's happening, though. I mean, we have to be realistic about the industry, and I think Dr. Bauman, you're very realistic as well. I mean, we're seeing how things are evolving. There's very few guys who are going to be getting into this field who have as much experience as you guys, obviously, because you guys have done strip, you guys have done all the procedures. Guys who are just getting into the field now are either just starting to learn to do FUE using something like the SAFE system, or they're jumping directly into purchasing one of these devices, hanging up a shingle, and saying they're experts. Because that's going to be happening a lot, and it's happening more often. And I can tell you that just based on the conversations that I'm having and the sheer number of plastic surgeons who are calling me up who want to get into hair, my whole thing is, if you can dummy proof it, then that's probably a direction to go in, and maybe you guys can kind of put your heads together and make a device like the Artas or the Artas itself, even better than it is.
Well, here's my concern, Spencer. I mean, I've got a pretty big concern with that. I mean, the bottom line is if you're making the procedure more dummy-proof, then are you saying that there's just going to be more dummies doing hair transplants?
Yes, there are. That's what's happening, unfortunately.
So I think that that's a big warning sign for the industry that, if you're out there looking for a hair transplant surgeon and you find the guy who just bought the robot last week, that guy's going to be pretty short on experience.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think that, and that's when it behooves you. I mean, as the...
Well, that's why, listen, I'm never going to be out of a job, but
yeah, you're going to be... and we're going to be correcting these cases.
Too, though. The NeoGraft guys do that too, Alan. They just, get a NeoGraft and put their shingle up as well the next day.
No doubt. And I'm not and we've had this discussion with Spencer on many different occasions that, I'm not a huge fan of, dermatologists purchasing a hair transplant device and thinking they can go out and design a hairline, because the first thing you notice on those patients is that the hairs are all pointing in the wrong direction. And they think that they're planting a garden and they're not planting hairs. So they have no concept of the design of a hairline or the shape of the face and the way that angles should be created. So I think it's just a big warning sign. And really the take-home message for the listeners, Spencer, is really you shouldn't choose your artist based on the paintbrush that they use, but choose them based on the results that they create on the canvas.
If we can make it more dummy-proof, if we can make it more consistent and less user-dependent, I think that a device like that might end up, in the end, being better for the vast majority of patients. And you're right. You said a funny thing, but it's true. There are going to be a lot more dummies, quote unquote, getting into this industry, and that's what worries me.
Look, we have got some guys in our industry, who never held a scalpel before they did a hair transplant, and honestly, that's kind of scary.
It's very scary. It's extreme. Listen, I'm here, just even here in Los Angeles, seeing what I see is just, it's mind-blowing. And these guys all have that shingle. You go to their websites, they are all experts. And some of these guys are board certified, and the work that's coming out of their offices, Alan and Dr. Yates, listen, you'd be honest, you would be appalled. And you know who some of these guys are. It's the way that it is. I think if it was possible to develop a device that is going to make it easier for especially the novices who are eventually going to hang up this shingle to perform a hair transplant surgery, and hopefully we can develop some sort of training for these guys, then I think it's going to make the industry a safer place than it will be if there's no, absolutely no standards in place, and if all of these devices are really as user dependent as the NeoGraft. And like I said, Doc, in your hands, the NeoGraft, you're producing incredible results. But that is not, in my view, the norm. There are plenty of people out there that have it, and the results are mediocre at best. Some of these guys have some experience in surgical hair restoration, but the vast majority of guys who are getting their hands on that, especially that device at this point, they don't.
I wanted to ask Alan, how long do you think it would take you to get good on a NeoGraft, where if you would send your relative to somebody who was a NeoGraft expert, how long would the learning curve be before you would say, let your brother or somebody have a hair transplant by somebody who had trained on it?
Well, remember, the hair transplant is not just getting the graft. So there's a lot of other pieces of the puzzle, right? So, it's not just how do you get the graft.
Understand the whole hair. We'll make it easy. I'm assuming that the guy's a hair transplant surgeon, just a strip guy converting to FUE. So he understands the whole hair thing. He's not just off the street giving you the device. I just want to know how long the learning curve would be about.
I think it's a good 6 to 12 months, easy.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just time on tissue. It depends on how many cases he's doing and the caseload, how many grafts and what kind of cases he's trying to tackle, and what kind of technicians he has. Technicians are very, very vital to this procedure. It's not just like a nose job where you got, the surgeon and a chisel and off he goes,
Right, right.
It's a very different procedure these days. You need the infrastructure to be able to do it correctly. And a lot of that's what I fear about some of these plastic surgeons. They don't have any support. They don't have technicians who know how to take care of the grafts, much less the patient.
Look, I had a long conversation with a Los Angeles plastic surgeon, a Beverly Hills guy, really good guy, good at what he does, great reputation. He got his hands on the NeoGraft, and now he has a hair transplant practice as well. He's concentrating on smaller procedures. He's doing a lot of eyebrows. But I explained to him, I said, do you really want to risk the reputation that you built, that took you years to get, on not really understanding all the nuances and what it really takes to produce a state-of-the-art hair transplant? I know you have this machine, and I know that the company says it's turnkey, and I know that they will provide you or set you up with a company that can provide you with technicians. But if you don't really know what you're doing, there could be either 1, 2, or 3. All you need is one really unhappy patient to completely destroy your reputation. Now, I think he understood that, and now he really wants to take a step back and learn how to do it correctly. But that's not what these companies are saying. And honestly, if I was the manufacturer of these devices, I would never allow the reputation of my instrument, the reputation of my device, to be in the hands of these novices.
So, that's why preceptorships and fellowships, and I always thank the surgeons that led me through the process, almost 20 years ago now, when I first started to learn to design the hairlines and to teach me to be a student of nature, because that's really what it takes. Yeah. To see what a natural hairline looks like.
Listen, I agree 100%. You guys know what my concerns are. I think it's, obviously you guys have chosen different directions as far as the devices that you use. Dr. Bauman, I want you to be as candid as you can be. What is your biggest concern about the Artas?
Well, I saw the artist at work. Artist at work. I went to Colorado. I visited Dr. Jim Harris, where the device was developed and researched and such. And I flew out there on my own dime, basically, ready to move forward to get the device. And this was, a couple of years back already now. And the case that was going on, really, the grafts did not look like the grafts that we get with NeoGraft. They did not look like 0.8. The scalp did not look as it looked a lot more traumatic to the scalp. It was a very difficult case. Granted, it was just that maybe it was the one case that I saw, but it was a case that unfortunately did not impress me. I was not thrilled with the quality of the grafts that were coming out. There were points where the artist was kind of doing its business, and the artist doesn't know if the grafts are not coming out correctly or if it's transecting grafts. You only know that after you examine the grafts. Whereas, when we have instant feedback with the NeoGraft or other manual devices, you get instant feedback. Are things going along well? And you don't have to wait for, a huge set of punches to occur before you know that is going on. But so anyway, that was really what the delay was. I mean, that was what stopped me from moving forward with Artas. And I looked at it compared to what we already had. Very happy with the grafts and the quality and the speed that we get with NeoGraft, and I'm thrilled with the results that we're getting. And obviously the patients, their results speak for themselves. The patients are thrilled, and I think we deliver a great product. Now, all you have to do to settle this argument, really, all you have to do, or to settle the conversation, is to ask Dr. Bill Yates, what did he choose to have his grafts extracted?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, but I think I don't think he necessarily chose the NeoGraft. I think he chose you as his surgeon.
No, but that's my whole point. My point is that it's not the tool, Spencer, that you can do great work with. It's not the paintbrush that makes the painter. It's the skill set. It's the team behind the transplant. It's not the tool. You can do great work with whatever tool you're good at. And when I hear patients tell me, well, this technique or this procedure doesn't yield as many grafts or doesn't grow as well, I always tell the patient, well, what that physician forgot to tell you was the last bit of his sentence, which was in his hands.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's well said. But there are physicians out there who have claimed to have seen, the NeoGraft in, during several procedures. One in particular told me this. And, at least in his estimation, because of the suction, there's, a significant greater chance of desiccation, of drying of the grafts. There is a significant greater chance of kind of like a tearing of the graft. Now, I have never seen this. This is what this particular surgeon has told me, and he has claimed to have seen, several procedures.
Sure.
I mean, Dr. Yates, what do you think about that possibility?
Well, I just want to interject one thing, before Bill takes over. I just wanted to say that, what we do with the NeoGraft is not the same as what NeoGraft is doing with all other surgeons. I mean, I've been under the hood of that device more times than the 67 Mustang I had in high school, I got the device in 2007, and honestly, we don't use suction anymore. We haven't used suction in years on any case, in any patient. And the limited depth tool that we use that sheaths the punch when we go in is customized for each and every single patient.
And that's the thing.
So there's the device is not the same. Like my NeoGraft is not the same as the NeoGraft that's down the block.
So you know what, and that's really important that you say that, because the truth of the matter is the average consumer does not know that. So if you go to Dr. Alan Bauman, if you go to have a hair transplant surgery at Bauman Medical, they may be using the NeoGraft, but they're not using the NeoGraft as intended. And sadly, the vast majority of guys are using the NeoGraft as intended. So maybe this desiccation is happening. Maybe this graft destruction for some grafts, in some hands, is happening. It's just not happening in your practice. So, I mean, even to have this, it's not even a debate, but this discussion, what's better, NeoGraft or the Artas, when you're involved, Dr. Bauman, it's kind of a different discussion, because you're using it in kind of like in a jerry-rigged way.
Yeah, well, it's not a stock model. It's not what's off the shelf. It's not the one that you get off the showroom floor. It's got modifications.
Well, and that
just comes from.
And that's important for you to say that, because it's much different. It's tough to compare what you're doing to what the average guy who has a NeoGraft is doing. And frankly, you know how I feel about it. The truth is, I'm not a huge fan of the way the machine was intended to be used. That's, and I've told you that before.
Yeah, well, I can understand that, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't use it that way anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we use the device in the best way possible. I mean, if I could figure out a better way to use the device after 1 million grafts harvested, man, we would do it.
Well, listen, you're getting great results, so there's no doubt that whatever you're doing extremely well. So, Dr. Yates, so what do you think about that?
What I think, Alan said it best. I mean, it's everybody has their own, favorite tool. It's more about the surgeon's experience than the actual tool. There are, a lot of roads, lead to Rome. one thing I will say, in defense of the artist is that, the artist is a fully automated system. So the computer's looking at the hairs, deciding, through algorithms, like monitoring 50 different things before it starts to punch or even decides to punch a hair, which you could override and say, oh, I don't like this hair. It's looking at the density, it's looking at the caliber of the hair grouping, kind of weeding out miniaturized hair so you don't end up, with, a dish full of miniaturized hair. So it's allowing you to pick the best hair to give your patient, the best result. As far as what Alan said, as far as the artist just punching and you really can't tell if you're transecting a whole bunch of grafts, that's true and not true. Usually within a grid, most people, can tell how well the grafts are doing with a little bit of experience to say these grafts are good, just how the grafts pop up. And, you can stop it at any second and check a couple grafts and, continue on. During the whole dissection, you're changing depth, angle, punch, depth, sizes and things like that. So you can change these things on the fly and check if your transection rate is ridiculous or acceptable or whatever you want it to be. So it's not something where you just kind of plug in and just watch it work and cross your fingers and hope for the best. You're dynamically controlling the dissection. If things aren't where you don't want it to be, you change it as need be, just like you would do with the NeoGraft or the Harris Safe system. So I don't agree with that. I think, I've seen grafts with the NeoGraft, like he said. I mean, I went to him. I like Alan and I like Boca Raton. And, the grafts, from the artist over time have gotten better and better and better. I do a lot of work still with the Safe system, and, the grafts with the artist and the Safe system, to me, look very comparable. And, I wouldn't want to plant anything in my patient's head where a year later, they're always going to look at the doctor and say, hey, why didn't my hair grow? So every doctor, should have in his best interest, of course, the patient, but nobody wants to have a patient looking at you mad after you cash their check, why didn't their hair grow? So you want to do everything you can do to make sure that post-operative visit is pleasant for you and the patient. So trust me, I'm not taking any chances on any voodoo or any speculative devices that aren't going to work.
Right. I mean, that's actually a great point, and that's a point that I really tried to make to this guy that just got his hands on a NeoGraft, and just how important it is, to really learn how to do it correctly, because it's obviously the worst part of that scenario would be the fact that there's an unhappy patient out there, someone who believes he's one of the walking wounded, or who didn't get their money's worth, or who really believes they're disfigured. But, every time a procedure is being performed, the physician is putting their reputation on the line. That's why I never understood this industry, to tell you the truth. I never understood a lot of the guys.
A lot of people don't come back because they're so ashamed after what happened that they don't come back, they don't complain, because who are they going to complain to? They're not going to tell anybody. There's no regulatory body to tell the doctor, hey, this doctor shouldn't be practicing, so they kind of suffer in silence.
Well, and you're right about that. I mean, it's certainly changed, over the years. With the IHRS and the American Hair Loss Association, we kind of became like a liaison between many unhappy patients and their physicians, try to, help them to make things right for themselves and to kind of inform the physician, hey, listen, you know what? This wasn't a great outcome. And I'm not just talking, IHRS guys. People contact us who have been to large chain clinics, and we have been able to get them full refunds. We've been able to really help them kind of move on with their lives. There was nothing else out there like what we do ever. So there's also, unfortunately, if patients don't find us and they don't feel like they have any recourse, they now go to the internet. And if the doctor doesn't handle the complication or the mishap properly, then, a lot can go down online. So, I think patients have more recourse than now than they ever had. And I think more patients are starting to speak out more than ever. But you're right, there's a certain psychology, Dr. Yates. It's one thing to admit that you had cosmetic surgery. You're admitting that you're concerned about your hair. Society doesn't allow us to be concerned about our hair. Then you have to admit that you had cosmetic surgery to try to fix a problem that society doesn't deem as a problem. And then you have to go after a doctor or say to the doctor, I'm unhappy with this. People just chalk it up to making a mistake and kind of moving on. So you're right. To a certain degree, that does still happen, but it's not happening as often as it used to. So,
well, everything's getting better. And I don't want to hog the mic, but the one final thing I want to
go ahead.
Just for FUE, most patients, even if you look at a lot of the surveys on a hair transplant, I say 60% of some studies, the patients comes back and says, "Oh, doc, it looks great, but I just wish it was more dense."
Right.
And that's a fixable problem. That's just expectations, and sometimes it's hard to really relay. Every hair transplant is different. There's no two hair transplants that are alike. But there's one thing that I found with FUE: nobody comes back and complains about the scar, as compared to when you have a strip procedure. You have two things going on. You got the back of the head, which nobody really talks about, because it's always, you're going to get this little scar, and he's a plastic surgeon or she's a plastic surgeon, and it's going to be beautiful. But a scar is a scar, and young guys, they'll say, well, I'm not going to cut my hair anyway, so short, so what do I care? But in reality, these guys don't even know what they're going to be doing next Tuesday. So how do they know that they're never going to cut their hair? And they're some of the most unhappy patients ever. They say, "Oh, my hair is not dense enough, and I got this dumb scar." So at least the good thing about FUE, you take away variables, and that's the thing in life, that if you got too many variables, you can't control anything. So if you got, and that's why I gravitated toward FUE, because you're removing one variable of potential dissatisfaction just from the whole process. So I really don't care how a guy gets there with the FUE. He can use NeoGraft, he can use Artas. He can use whatever he wants, but I just think it's a far superior procedure, and I'd be willing to talk to anybody about that. I mean, I just think it's a far superior procedure.
Well, look, here's the point. There are doctors that disagree. There are doctors out there who I've had on the show who have had multiple hair transplants and who've decided to have another, there's one guy that I had on, Dr. Dower. He chose, and he does FUE in his practice, to have a strip for his third procedure. In his mind, and based on his experience, he believes that strip is the way to go. And maybe it's because he already has a strip scar. But I always tell people this, and I am the biggest proponent of FUE, and I hate repeating this, but the truth is I was the person who spearheaded the entire campaign to get people to listen, guys in the ISHRS, guys in the IAHRS, to take what Woods was doing seriously. And honestly, that changed the field completely. So I am the biggest fan of FUE. I don't think anyone under 35 should even consider a strip. I mean, I think it's crazy, and you made a lot of sense. When you're in your 20s, you don't know what the hell is up. You're just desperate. You're emotional. You think that you're losing your mojo, you're losing your looks, you're not going to find the girl of your dreams, you're not going to get the job that you want, all because of your hair loss. So people are desperate, and they will make desperate decisions based on several things. One, they put a lot of trust in physicians, put physicians on pedestals, and if they don't do their due diligence, they may be convinced by a physician that strip is the way to go in their particular case. And a lot of physicians kind of use some of these devices as a bait and switch. I hate to say it, but that's the way that it is. They may end up having the Artas or the NeoGraft, but they don't want to do those procedures. They kind of have it in their offices, but they're really pushing strip. So I tell young guys, you know what? Either don't have surgery at all, or if you're going to have surgery, start off with an FUE. Take baby steps. At least, the very least, you're not going to have a linear scar in the back of your head. And if you want to shave down eventually, there's a much stronger possibility that you'll be able to do that. But not everybody listens.